everyone. So Catherine's already kind of set the scene in that we're thinking about trees this morning. And I'm going to be honest, I found it such a huge topic. It's been hard to know where to focus, really. There's some fantastic resources called the Bible Project, which I looked at to start with. And if anyone really wants to go deeper into kind of some of the biblical imagery around trees, starting with the tree of life in Genesis, going kind of right through the Bible, lots of references in the Old Testament. We've got the burning bush, this kind of God really humbling himself and like stooping down to talk to someone in this very small tree. We've got Jesus identifying as the true vine, again a kind of very woody plant. We've got the cross, references to Jesus kind of being raised on the tree. The cross is often called a tree. Kind of through the New Testament. I'm going to use some verses in a minute. The very first Psalm has tree imagery in it, right the way through to Revelation. So there are kind of amazing tree images in the Bible. The Bible Project particularly focuses on the tree of life imagery and tracks that through. I then kind of thought about okay, so we've got all this kind of almost like these metaphors, this imagery, this symbolism, but what about us as Christians relating to actual trees? I mean, Catherine's kind of shared a little bit of how amazing actual trees are, and then that kind of takes us down the route of kind of care for creation, being good stewards of this world that we live in. So we've kind of got that whole realm as well there. But what I've actually settled on is just kind of a much smaller focus for today, but it does mean we've got a lot more we can come back to in the future. So I'm going to start just by talking a little bit about my own roots. So my own roots are in Derbyshire. I grew up in Derbyshire on the edge of the Peak District. It's an absolutely beautiful part of the country. It is beautiful, but it's also quite wild. You've got the kind of the peaks, the hills, you've got rivers, you've got some quite kind of wild weather at times. I know I've heard about snow in June on one of the passes. It's kind of the sort of place that makes me feel alive, and I certainly feel a strong connection with the landscape there. I've got kind of some beautiful books about it. This isn't probably the part of the peak which I know the best. This is probably a little bit further north, but it was a walk Dave and I went on. So you've got the heather, you've got the rock. So it's kind of this quite rugged but very beautiful landscape. And then I moved away from home years ago, kind of went to university, never really went back home, set up home with Dave. And I think that I'm just going to say that the church really helped me feel at home. So having moved away from a place I had a very strong connection with, and still do really, it's the church which then became community for me. So whether at university and having people in churches there who showed us hospitality, or moving to Bristol and having friends who've become lifelong friends, and then coming here to the Chew Valley and having people who've really come around us. And I guess Dave and I got married quite young. I was just 22. So actually leaving home and having a church community who act like family was like really, really special. These are kind of, I guess, roots. These are my roots. And that's kind of coloured where I wanted to go today, really. I'm going to just read a few verses. There's so many more. I'm just picking out a very small number. But the first psalm in the Bible, the first little bit of it. So he says, he will be standing firm. This is verse 3 actually. He will be standing firm like a flourishing tree, planted by God's design, deeply rooted by the brooks of bliss, bearing fruit in every season of his life. He is never dry, never fainting, ever blessed, ever prosperous. And the bit I really want to focus on this morning is this idea of being planted. So here, planted by God's design, deeply rooted. And I'm going to think a little bit more about this idea of being deeply rooted. Colossians 2:7 says, "Let your roots go down into him, and let your lives be built on him. Then your faith will grow strong in the truth you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness." Got some different translations of that. So it's the same verse, Colossians 2. This is verse 7. "So just like the roots of a tree, draw your sustenance and strength from him. Like a building rising up out of its foundation, your life makes the full stature of Christ visible. Standing tall in his shoes, firm in your faith posture, the language of gratitude that overflows from your lips reflects the exact impression of what you were taught." And I'm going to skip ahead right to the very end of the Bible in Revelation. This is Revelation 22, and I'm just going to read a little bit. So, start of chapter 22. "Then the angel showed me the river of water of life, flowing with water, clear as crystal, continuously pouring out from the throne of God and the Lamb. The river was flowing in the middle of the street of the city, and on either side of the river was the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of ripe fruit, according to each month of the year. The leaves of the tree of life are for the healing of the nations." Okay, so those are just a few verses, but as we kind of think today, I'm just going to focus in a little bit more about this idea of roots, being rooted in Christ, being rooted and grounded in Christ. So while I was preparing this, I watched a film. It's a very beautiful film. It's a little bit like a documentary about Knepp Estate, and some of you may have heard of it. This is the book which goes with it. It's called Wilding. So basically, there was an estate which was used, I guess, around the time of the Second World War and post-war years, which had changed from kind of, I guess, being more like parkland and trees to being intensively farmed. The ground wasn't suitable for that sort of intensive farming, and the farmers there had to rely really heavily on artificial fertilizers and pesticides just to grow the crops. But over time, this had severely damaged the soil to the point that the soil had basically died, and the kind of people working there at the time who were managing the farm, they had incredibly old oak trees, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they could see that the oak trees were really suffering and struggling, and they brought in an expert who'd spent his life working with trees, and there were a few things which he pointed out, really. One was that the trees had become isolated from each other, and considering Catherine's talk a minute ago about this incredible network under the ground of the roots in connection with the various fungus, that is like, it's a communication network. These trees, more than we've probably ever realised, are actually like a social beings that rely on each other and support each other through these chemical reactions underground. And the ploughing and the intensive use of chemicals had destroyed much of this network. And so the trees themselves were really struggling. And this was the catalyst for what became a project over a decade or more, of kind of bringing the soil back to life, because they realised that for anything to grow well, the soil itself had to be healthy. And they completely transformed their land management practices in order to bring life back to the soil. And they'd been told it would take 100 years beyond their lifetime, and actually within 10 years the soil was coming back to life, and all sorts of endangered species were kind of seeking out this plot of land. And it just makes me think too that we are a community, aren't we? We are a network, a church, a family, and just like those kind of trees kind of connecting and communicating in order to stay healthy, we do look out for each other, whether that's someone bringing a meal round when you're unwell or exhausted, or sitting, in my case, sitting with children when you can't get what, you need them to sit with one child so you can get the other one to sleep at night when they're tiny. It's like just those really practical forms of support really help. So whereas the Wilding Project was about restoring soil which had been severely damaged over years, I want to also draw on ideas from another book. It's a children's book. It's C.S. Lewis, and it's The Magician's Nephew, from the Narnia series. And this is the first one in that series. And the children go to this new land of Narnia. It's right at the beginning. It's a brand new world just being created. There's this huge lion, Aslan, who through all these stories has this kind of Christ-like bearing within the stories. You can see so many kind of references and similarities. And he's singing over this land, and this land is kind of coming to life. But his song makes the soil so rich and so fertile that all sorts of bizarre things grow. So there's a bit of iron broken off a London lamppost, which somehow ends up in this land, and it gets thrown into thrown at the lion originally, but it goes into the soil. And out of that little bit of metal comes this incredible lamppost, which is lit and stays lit for hundreds of years through these stories. And then there's the children's little paper bag of sweets. They had some toffees, and the toffees are all stuck together, and the paper bag's stuck to the toffees, and they're literally peeling the paper bag off the toffees, and they're so hungry. They have, I think it's 2 each and 1 left, and they decide to plant the toffee, hoping that they'll get a toffee tree. And in fact, they get this beautiful tree, which is like an apple tree, but has this incredibly sweet fig-like fruits on it, and the leaves are like honesty. They're like paper leaves. And you can just see how, what was planted is growing because the soil is so amazing. And even there's this rather mean magician character at the beginning. He kind of becomes a little bit nicer by the end, called Uncle Andrew. And he just kind of gets his comeuppance at this point in the story, and is being held upside down by these talking animals, and out of his pockets fall gold and silver coins, and they fall into the ground. And even out of those coins grow trees which have actual gold and silver leaves, and those leaves are made into crowns for the first king and queen of Narnia. So the soil is so fertile that even the most bizarre things which are planted grow. And it just occurred to me that if we're thinking about being rooted and grounded and planted into Christ, then we have the best soil ever. And we aren't toffees in paper bags or bits of old iron. We are, in the first place, designed in Christ's image. So we are designing God's image. So not only have we this incredible blueprint, which each of us carry, but we have the most fertile soil that we have each been planted into. And this isn't something which we're striving for. This isn't some hard work effort. We're trying to become better. It's just like being grateful, I think, that God has planted us already in Christ. And so as we rest in that knowledge, we get to kind of show who we were always designed to be. And I just think as well, because we're community, because we are all planted, we're all unique, but we all bear God's image, and we are all planted into the same soil. It's like, I think that brings a natural sense of unity between us. Because we know we're one body, we know we have one spirit, and we get to grow together in that sense of humility. And I'm just going to read this prayer. I wrote it around the time when I was starting to think about this. It isn't about trees particularly, but maybe something of that idea will come through. So I'm just going to read it out. So your kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. Breathe your life over us, through us, in us. Inspire our decisions by your wisdom and creativity. Let your justice, provision and care be hallmarks of your children. Satiate our hunger for more with your presence. May our lives glow with your aliveness, creating spaciousness for people to thrive. That was my picture that I did it. Okay, I'm going to hand back to you.